Another tradition with deep roots in Italy history is that one of the Presepio. Maybe most of you know this, but maybe you know better the nativity scene. And the most ancient representation of the Virgin with baby Jesus was found in a niche in the catacombs of Priscilla in Rome, painted by an unknown artist in the 3rd century AD.
Right. And so then the tradition of painting this scene was continued by the Byzantines. They continued to represent this, but slightly different than the way we see it now.
Today, see,
right.
The Virgin is laying down.
Right. And it's basically immediately following the birth of baby Jesus. So Virgin Mary's laying down on the bed of straw. Jesus is in the manger, and Joseph is waiting outside. And usually Joseph is dressed in yellow, as in these various
So
ones.
more or less, it depicted more the moment right after the
birth.
The birth.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And the tradition of the three-dimensional nativity scene originally was primarily only an Italian tradition that had origin during the time of San Francesco. And it is commonly said that in 1223, Francesco created the first live nativity scene. And at the time, Francesco had recently made a trip to Bethlehem and had been deeply moved by this experience, by the people, by their costumes, so much that he even began to use some of their costumes.
Yeah.
And the scene that he created in a small town of Greccio, near his hometown of Assisi, in reality is much more profound than simply staging the nativity scene.
Right. So Francesco did want to create something more than just like Francesco, the staging of the scene.
Yeah.
But to appreciate this, we have to understand the situation that Francesco was living in.
The time,
yeah. It was a world of battle and war. The Pope was leading the Crusades, like we said, around 1223. The Pope was leading crusades to convert people to Christianity, and no lives were spared. In fact, the Pope really had an open disregard for Muslims, calling them beasts, and had no concern of how many were killed. Francesco, instead, as we know, was preaching peace. He was inspired by Jesus,
words.
Right, by Jesus's words of love, peace, and tolerance, which are still very important today, of course. So Francesco wanted this nativity scene to share that message, that simple message. But before we tell you a little bit more about that, we'll ask you to answer the question, who was not a part of the nativity scene that Francesco created in 1223? Jesus, Mary, Joseph, or all of the above?
The answer is, it's unbelievable, but all of the above. That is why Francesco has to request only a manger, an ox, and a donkey, and just some straw. But why?
Well, because the two animals, the ox and the donkey, represented the pagans and the Jews. The straw symbolized the host. So by the animals eating the straw, that really symbolized that they were, with time, accepting Jesus.
So this was more like a message. And it is Tommaso da Celano, who was Francesco's first biographer, described the live nativity with these words. The manger is carried along with straw. The ox and donkey are led. Simplicity is honored. Poverty is exalted. Humility is praised. And the small village of Greccio is transformed into a new Bethlehem.
Clearly, in addition to having an important message, he started a long-lasting tradition. So in addition to the live nativity that continue still today. Also, continual depictions of the birth of Jesus in churches. This is in the Church of Assisi, which depicted, but also then shortly thereafter, and around the year 1290, Arnolfo di Cambio created the first nativity with statues, which, and the original one that he made is still viewable in a church in Rome, right? And so this tradition of making the nativity scene with statues became popular. First, it was the Tuscans who were sort of the masters of this, and they would make the statues in terracotta and in wood. But ultimately, it became the Kingdom of Naples that became the masters. And yeah, and still today, they create the most renowned statues.
In fact, in Naples, by the 1700s, recreating a nativity scene in people's home had become a deeply felt tradition. So much that there were competitions between the family for who had the most splendid nativity scene. And so noble families dedicated an entire room to the nativity scene, dressing the statues in authentic gowns and real jewels.
Yeah.
So very expensive.
Yes, yes.